Welcome to Professor's Corner. Zach and I are here discussing topics in applied ethics and public policy, and in particular, we're having a pressing conversation about the value of life in new liberalism's healthcare and medical science policy. Now here, this week, we're looking at the platitude in that core morality of the value of life. And we're looking at the way new liberalism has, in effect, deconstructed Christianity, or the Christian West, with regard to this value. Before Zach and I joined here in this conversation, making the point that the value of life, the high dignity that's placed on human being, will be found no place outside of the Christian West. It happens, though, within liberal development within the West, the liberal political theory, that a philosopher by the name of Immanuel Kant actually pulled the value of life, the dignity of life, out of the Christian metaphysic, or at least he thought he had. And it was the ability of the individual to be autonomous and free that gave the individual autonomy and dignity, particularly dignity. And it's that dominates this whole discussion in medical practice. So with that, Zach, let's take a look at where new liberalism begins with regard to making this statement that political philosophy looms large in applied ethics, and nowhere do we see it more than in the area of medical practice. And the concept of moral community plays large in this whole thing. And you might want to say, why moral community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When are we considered a part of the moral community?
And the moral community, in effect, replaces the metaphysics of Christian theology. Right. Because now the entity that confers rights, protects rights, and maintains rights would be the moral community. Mm-hmm. And the moral community is going to be interpreted by the ethical normative theory. Mm-hmm. So that's really what we're looking at. And so we're going to take a quick glance at sort of the way the Kantian and the way the utilitarian construct.
The moral community can be described in different ways.
And so what we have is that this autonomy that we had in political theory, we now have by giving the patient the autonomy, and we might think of the patient as person, which is a very warm and fuzzy, and on its surface, we certainly would agree with treating patients as persons. So the social ideal is that man is free within their biological constitution to become whatever he or she wills, as long as they assume responsibility for the choices. That was what we learned in our reading from Mitchell in his chapter on liberal humanism. Skepticism towards the traditional understanding of the metaphysical nature of human nature and the place of human beings in the universe have made it possible for people to begin to think about transcending their biology. Mm-hmm. What you need then, of course, is the very thing that people tend not to like is too much science, but you need the science to sort of do the transcending, right? The point really gets made very clear in one of the readings this week by Bloom that we're looking at, where he says in his chapter on biotechnology and humanity that with the loss of confidence in human nature as the moral boundary removes natural limits to remaking oneself. So where, in a way, I remember a situation in which I was interviewing for a job once with the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. I got all the way through 3 or 4 interviews down to the chief of staff, and they noticed that I had been involved with Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity. And he asked me what that meant. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I've been involved in doing bioethics. He said, well, how do you view bioethics? And I said, well, I see it as setting limits, right? Because contemporary human beings are trying to transcend that, right? Mm-hmm. And that ended the interview. I didn't get the job. He had been engaged, this was in the period of Bush 43 and the stem cell debate, and the chairman wanted to justify overturning the Bush 43 policy on stem cell. And I wasn't particularly interested in being part of that. Right. But the interesting thing is the relative modern person that this chief of staff was, and for the chairman, and sort of the naivety about what bioethics was about, right? But the idea of setting limits is sort of not a good thing, right? So, so Bloom is making the same point. So you can see why some people today might say, well, see, science and technology has now made traditional mindset, traditional ethic obsolete. So what happens in this new system is we have autonomy is sort of the supreme value, right? Now, I'm kind of hedging on the way to characterize it because we can think of supreme value in sort of different constructions. It can be given supreme value from a utilitarian construction. And the problem of it is that can be rebuttable. You can factor in things that might not get you what you want. So they tend to reject that, and they move towards Kant and the Kantian dynamic. And this is sort of what we were explaining at the top of the discussion. With Kant, he believed in a objective moral law, right? And that the rational mind made universalizations to apprehend the objective moral law. But the thing about Kant is there was always an objective moral law. And that's because Kant was sort of a transitional figure between Christianity and the situation we find ourselves in now. And so what happened is that the idea of the objective moral law gets tossed out. And when that happens, what are you left with?
Maybe some of the perks of it, but nothing to really ground it.
Nothing to ground it. We still have an autonomous agent, right? That is attached to supreme significance. Sort of we have what we might call the man God, so to speak. But what becomes important then is not the apprehension of what the truth is about the moral law, but just the ability to make the choice, to exercise the capacity. And that is what dignity is conferred upon.
Just the fact that you can make a choice and that you...
Exactly.
That's
enough,
essentially.
For the new liberal, that's expressing it through Kantianism. And if you do that, and you have intrinsic value on autonomy, right, you do get this supreme value, but you give up truth. And of course, they don't have a problem with that because truth is what gets in the way since they don't believe in personal ideals.
It's oppressive.
It's for all the reasons we've been talking about. So, so what happens in here is that what gets valued is a choice if it's freely expressed. And it becomes a separate component from the action that's actually done. Meaning
there's no influence or coercion, maybe.
Yeah.
That it's purely your own choice.
And you accept the consequences. And it's that quality of the choosing that through your intellectual processes that gives you and me our dignity in this theory, right? It's not the fact we're creating the image of God. Okay, so there are certain implications of this. First of all, of accepting autonomy in this sort of Kantian sense. There's not going to be any truth or falsity. There's no reasons for choosing one ideal over the other. That there are no positive grounds for freedom, only positive grounds for not infringing upon freedom. Does that distinction make sense? It's really conceptually tough.
Yeah.
But if you're making a case for freedom, you need both the view not to infringe and a view that states affirmative freedom. And what the contemporary new liberalism, it doesn't have the metaphysics that gives you that type of liberty that makes it unrebuttable, because God is out of the picture. Utilitarian is insufficient. You can't have any metaphysical view in the pluralistic new. So you have to say, no knowledge means that we've safeguarded everybody's choice, because nothing is true, everything becomes acceptable. So I think the question now, having looked at the social political conception and its implications for truth and personal, the pluralism and the intrinsic value, and the rejection of utilitarianism, now we want to say, so how does this affect medicine, right? So new liberalism in medicine and the value of life, that's really what we want to focus on. So what that means is that the patient becomes the person. The ideal for that person is to be their own autonomous, rational, reasoning kind of entity, a moral law giver at the human level, the man God. And so since those choices are neither true nor false, and they can't be assessed, you can see where the right to die, you can see where abortion, you can see where genetic counseling on formation of life and family and all those sort of things come into this domain, giving people not to they don't care about what's decided. It's the fact that it's decided freely and autonomously, right? That's all that matters. It's interesting that in his chapter on medicine and the liberal revolution, Oliver O'Donovan makes the statement that the relation of human beings to their own bodies is the last frontier. This idea of being able to transcend the limitations of our own biology, right? It's transforming medicine, which is the point he makes in further in the chapter on medicine and liberal revolution. He says, he talks about the revolution and he counsels against the liberal revolution that it has at the center of its concern the maintenance and extension of freedoms, understood in the modern and misleading sense as the abolition of limits and the constraints that are on us. So you can kind of see that now medicine is going to shift from the restoration of disease and the restoration of health, the alleviation of disease, to sort of remaking, to sort of improving our health.
Yeah.
You see that?
Redefining it in a sense.
Exactly, and that's the nature.
Good health.
Because as long as the individual chooses it, then that's where medicine needs to follow. Okay? So now let's take a look at this platitude about the value of life, because it gets a reconstruction. No society would exist if there wasn't, credence given to the value of life. However, I think it's better to think about it is that the value of life is the reason for preserving society. In other words, not just when we say that a society couldn't exist without life, right? We would say it could be any interpretation. But what we flip this around and we say in our social conception, no, the society survives because there is a particular value of a conception that continues. So in the Christian West, where we have this dignity of human being, though it is conferred by God, that's why people appreciate liberalism, because liberalism emerges out of Christianity. And so does science.
Sort of take that fact for granted too, a lot of times.
Exactly. And so we have three ways of interpreting the value of life. The first would be sort of the utilitarian way, which wants to talk about sentience, which is, if you look it up in the dictionary, it just means types of feelings and experiences. It's a fairly low level of existence.
You can feel pain.
Yeah. You have to have a certain rationality, being able to project a goal and pick the means, but it's not a very sophisticated view of universal.
Maybe if you're hungry, you eat kind of
That's
thing.
right. But it's a quality of experience. And then the Kantian view is this autonomous rational agency, where it's more certain capacities that you have, the ability to reason in certain ways, and if those are lacking, you're not part of the moral community. For the utilitarian's moral community, if you lack sentience, you're not part of the moral community. So let's think about it. A stem cell, embryo, are they going to be sentient beings?
They're probably not going to be considered.
Are they rational Kantian reasoning? No, they are not. How about a child, a developing baby at 8 months? They can feel pain, but is that going to be the full concept of sentience? No, it's
probably not.
No. Yeah. Is going to be a Kantian, autonomous, rational thinking being? No. So even at that stage, that's why you can get to post-abortion. You could have a baby that's born that's 1 or 2, 3 weeks old. Are they sentient? Not in the sense of utilitarian.
Some people can even take that logic to justify even taking the life of maybe 2 or 3-year-olds, because they still don't fulfill maybe their ideal of what it means.
At whatever point you can quantify for the utilitarian where they have sentience, that's the point at which they're part of the moral community. Right? So we could look at the other end of life, and there's all kinds of issues that we get into. The point here is we shift down into, we want to look at how this differs from the sanctity of human life, right? To develop it biblically with regard to abortion, people say, well, abortion's never used in the Bible, therefore, it doesn't prohibit it. But this is a shallow reading, really, of the Bible, in that we don't want to just proof text or want to go below the text, but there are a number of passages that talk about the positive value of life, that God knew us and is involved in our formation at the point of conception. And that's from there, that's where we develop the notion of the sanctity of human life. If we were to contrast worldviews now, in where we are in the context of medicine, that the sanctity of human life attaches significance to the bearer of experiences, whereas the utilitarian and the Kantian attach significance to the quality of experiences or the capacities that individuals have. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And if you lack in those at any time in those capacities or those experiences, you're no longer part of the moral community. Whereas when you attach significance to the bearer of those experiences, the bearer, so that's why we can find ourselves extending our love to, at the point of conception, to the human being, because they have the potential to develop and to fully develop self-determining beings. And we don't do what the utilitarian does or what the Kantian does, is see life as a stream of experiences or capacities that we can chop up at any given point, like we chop sausage, right? The body, the bearer of experience, is seen as the vessel through which experiences or capacities flow, but it has no proper value in and of itself. I see. You got it? And in the Christian view, philosophically speaking, we attach significance to the bearer, which means, yeah, we have hard cases like anencephalitic kids that we could deal with if we had more time. But the point is that we have this, we attach experience at that level. And the next issue, people say, well, that isn't that a form of speciesism? You know, you're just attaching to the body. But we're not just attaching to the body. It's the metaphysical understanding that the individual, from the point of conception to death, will become and develop, has potential, and that you can't chop that at any given point. Again, back to, and it is not arbitrary and capricious, as you know, in terms of speciesism, which is, of course, the idea of speciesism. I kind of got ahead of myself, but that's the point in which you're saying that there's no significance other than just attaching to your own biology, your own species. Right.
There's nothing really that places us above the rest of the animal kingdom.
But it's our ability to love, which is a significant experience for anybody, that we attach to. And that is that's not an arbitrary reason. That's a very clear reason for why we respect human beings. I think that takes care of for us.
Absolutely.